What do we do about Me Too? The Me Too movement has been the topic of heated discussions, dividing families and friends, communities and churches and the government. And we've all seen allegations about the Catholic priests and the megachurch pastors and the men in Hollywood, and most recently during the Supreme Court nomination proceedings. Now, I know that this is a very difficult and sensitive subject to discuss. So my goal here tonight is to help us navigate a constructive conversation about what to do with allegations of sexual assault and sexual harassment. In 2006, activist Tanara Burke started using the phrase Me Too because she wanted people to be aware of sexual assault against women. But in 2017, the hashtag Me Too movement exploded on social media, and we saw men's heads dropping like dominoes from allegations, and charges were filed, and even careers were destroyed. But with all the hype and with all the excitement around the Me Too movement, are we creating an environment that makes it difficult to protect those who are falsely accused? On the other hand, how can we create an environment that breaks down barriers so that victims feel safe to come forward and share their story? So what do we do with Me Too? The first thing is to put aside personal opinions. Let me lay out the facts. Every 98 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. 9 out of 10 rape victims are female. And only 35% of all sexual assaults are even reported. Yes, these are astonishing statistics. And I can even remember a time myself when I was being sexually harassed at work, and I complained to a manager, and his response to me was, "You might want to think about your career before you come forward with that allegation." Victims are often harassed and threatened, judged by their own peers, ridiculed, insulted on social media, and made to feel shamed as if they asked to be sexually assaulted or harassed. And if the victim does not come forward immediately, then her credibility is also in question. On the flip side, there are men who have been falsely accused. And although this does not happen all the time, it does happen. For example, in the Bible, there's a man named Joseph who was an honorable man, and he was falsely accused of raping his master's wife. And she pursued him day after day after day, and he continued to reject her request to sleep with him, and she cried rape. And as a result, Joseph spent years in jail as an innocent man. And if we are not careful, the Me Too movement will be seen as a bulldozer running over the innocent and as an attack on men instead of a movement that brings about awareness of sexual assault and sexual harassment. So we must put aside personal opinions, but secondly, we must give a voice to the victims. The Bible also tells us about a story of a beautiful virgin princess named Tamar and her brother Amnon. And Amnon was absolutely obsessed with Tamar, so much that he tricked her to come into his bedchamber, and when he ordered everyone else out, he overpowered her. And Tamar's response was, "No, my brother, please do not do this outrageous thing, for where would I carry my shame?" But Amnon raped Tamar, and when he was finished, he discarded her. And when Absalom, Tamar's other brother, came and heard what happened, he ran to Tamar and he said, "Tamar, just remain silent." Tamar's voice was powerless in the face of power, and it was Tamar who carried the shame. And unfortunately, there are many Tamars in this world today. There are Tamars in your home, Tamars on your job, Tamars in your church, and I am Tamar. And you may even be Tamar, but the Me Too movement has now given a voice to all the Tamars whose voices who once were made silent. But even when a victim has a voice, she often carries shame. In 1936, there was a young 8-year-old girl who was raped. And although her rapist was convicted, he went to jail for 1 day. And he was released, and then he was murdered. And this little girl went mute for almost 5.5 years because she believed that her voice killed her rapist because she said his name. And she did not want to speak again so that she would not kill anyone else with her voice. This little girl's name was Marguerite Ann Johnson, and she later changed her name to Maya Angelou. And the famous poet Maya Angelou said that there is nothing worse than carrying an untold story inside of you. So we must put aside personal opinions, give a voice to the victims, but finally, we must be willing to listen. Our country is so angry. We are so divided, and everyone is yelling. And no one is listening. No one is listening to the facts. No one is listening to the voices of the victims. And no one is listening to those who have been falsely accused. And I know that this Me Too movement, it is forcing us to have uncomfortable conversations, but we must draw the line on what is considered misconduct, sexual misconduct in the church and in the workplace. Because we must give the victims the opportunity to be able to come forward and feel safe to tell their stories, but at the same time, do our due diligence to find out all the facts so that we do not destroy the life of someone who has been falsely accused. The Me Too movement is not new. What is new is our response. Because we are now living in the middle of a cultural shift, and the voices of Tamar and Joseph can no longer be silenced. So I want to ask you 3 questions. Number 1, what is your knee-jerk reaction when you hear of an allegation of sexual assault or sexual harassment? Number 2, what are the barriers that are keeping the victims from coming forward to tell their story? And number 3, what is our responsibility and the church's responsibility to break down those barriers? I'll leave you with this. Sexual assault and sexual harassment are not a woman's issue. It is a human issue. So let's not make these next few conversations about personal opinions. Let's give a voice to the victims, and let's be willing to listen. The victims and the falsely accused, they deserve to have their voices heard. Thank you for navigating this difficult conversation.